Hi, welcome to another mentoring moment. Dr. Berin Gilfillan here. We're in a series called The Power Principles of Life, and today's power principle, they all begin with the letter P, is the power of proclamation. And I just want to go back to a story when I was with Reinhart Bank. Many of you may know that I was his television producer, and we traveled together all over the world for about 3.5 years. And Reinhart was very much a spiritual father to me. And I remember us gathering once a year. We used to gather and plot out the campaigns for the coming year in the conference room in Germany where we lived there. And I lived next door to Reinhart, and just learned so much from him. And as we gathered around the table, we're plotting the Kenya, and we're going to go to Malawi, we're going to go to Ghana, and these different nations, and we're setting out the calendar. And then somebody says, well, why don't we go to Sudan? And they were plotting to go to Sudan. And I thought, Sudan, and I knew that some of the threats, traveling with Rhino was no easy matter. There was massive crowds. I remember being in a crowd of 400,000 on one side, 400,000 on the other side, and they were pushing because the cars were going down the middle of the crowd, and we thought we were going to die. And we had other times where tear gas bombs were thrown into the motorcade where we were traveling with him, and we're thinking Sudan. We're thinking, oh my goodness, there's lots of Islamic type of influences there, and this could be a very dangerous crusade. And I could just see the fear coming across the group, and then somebody said to Reinhard, I just think we need to pray more about that one. We need to pray more than that about that particular crusade in Sudan. And I remember Reinhard just hitting the conference table, and he said, "We've prayed long enough." He said, "People do not get saved by praying, they get saved by preaching." And at that point, he was just talking about proclamation. He says, by the foolishness of preaching, people get saved. There has to be a proclamation of the gospel. And every time when we did these campaigns with Reinhard, there was this proclamation, and then signs and wonders followed the proclamation of the gospel. And this is what Paul writes to the Corinthian church. He says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached or proclaimed to save those who believe." It's by the message proclaimed. It has to be spoken. It has to be proclaimed. And Paul wrote those things. And it was just such a lesson to me that, we've prayed long enough. We need to proclaim. We need to preach. Now, the Apostle Paul writes even further on this topic like this. He writes the book of Romans and talks about the need that somebody has to go. And this particular scripture came so real to me on another crusade that I was with Reinhard in the country of Ghana. And it was a tiny city called the city of Ho. It's in a remote part of Ghana, a very small town. And, we only had about 30 or 40,000 people there. But on our way back, I just was thinking, as we were traveling in the night, on the Sunday night, going back to Accra to fly home to Germany, and I remember just thinking, wow, this is a remote place, and we just spent this last 4 or 5 days in traveling, into far areas through these valleys and all over this nation, and I just began to think of the scripture. How beautiful on the mountaintops are the feet of him who brings good news, from Isaiah 52:7. Who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. And Paul goes even deeper into this, and he says, how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? How shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. And proclamation is what caused this to happen. And I thought we could have just stayed back home. We could have watched football on TV. We could have done, 100 other things and had a barbecue with the family. We chose to go into this remote area. We go on those mountaintops and go to that city, and almost an entire village and region got saved because of it. And I just remember Reinhard, saying these words. He used to say that it's an amazing thing that our mortal hands can build an everlasting kingdom, and that our mortal lips can preach an everlasting gospel. And so to me, this area of proclamation is just so critical in the things of the kingdom. The Great Commission that Jesus gave, and this is the one that Reinhart liked the most, because the one in Matthew talks about make disciples of all nations, but the one in Mark says these things. He says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, and he who does not believe will be condemned. And, I'll just close with this, is that, the Apostle Paul was just driven with this absolute passion, but also kind of a requirement that we must proclaim. And so the Apostle Paul says these words. He says, for if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. And he just said, I have to proclaim. I have to speak this out. There's an amazing statement I heard. I don't know who gave it, but they made a comment about the early church. And they said these words: if they did what they did with what they had, imagine what we could do with what we have if we had what they had. And what they had was what Paul says here. He says, woe unto me if I don't preach this gospel. They had a passion to bring this message of the gospel to a whole generation, and to proclaim it and to speak it into every part of the world that they lived in. And we need to have that same passion so we can accomplish the same results. God bless you. Until next time.